All right, hey everyone. So today Surly dropped the new Straggler. It's an all new, updated, all steel drop bar bike with some welcome changes, and of course some very Surly-esque changes. So I've got 11 thoughts on this bike. Let's just dive right into it. So introduced in 2014, the Surly Straggler was designed from day one as a rugged, go-anywhere steel drop bar bike. For 2014, it certainly was somewhat ahead of its time with pretty solid tire clearance, combining a cyclocross-inspired frame with, of course, that tire clearance, disc brakes, horizontal dropouts, which we will get into, and a host of rack and fender mounts. It was actually built to, well, handle everything from, say, daily commuting to light touring and gravel adventures. Despite being around for over a decade with a variety of colorway options, the frame has remained unchanged until today. So between the All-City Space Horse and this Surly Straggler, those were the two most common bikes that I sold before the pandemic at a bike shop. And for good reason, really. The Straggler was built for, well, it could be a bike that could get you around town to work, or be that cruiser for, say, those recreational day rides, or even a bike packing trip, right? As the name might suggest, this version, or the old version, it wasn't one for the podium, and it's no surprise that the new version is still, well, not. But it's not slow either, but more on that soon, of course. So I think more important here is that Surly made some really thoughtful changes with this bike where they felt like they needed them, while also not straying too far from what Surly does best. Being weird, of course. So before we dive into the bike specs, I do want to take a quick moment to let you all know that this video is partially supported by Tailfin. Tailfin designs and engineers technical bikepacking equipment for almost any kind of adventure. Innovation and quality are at the heart of what make them tick, and their constant strive to create better performing gear means that you can just focus on enjoying the ride. They offer a range of options for hauling your gear, whether you're taking on a big multi-week event or simply escaping for an overnighter. So for more on Tailfin, be sure to click the card in the top right corner here, or else follow the link in the description below. So the Straggler is still built from Surly's Natch tube set, which is 4130 chromoly, butted in specific areas to improve ride quality while shaving a little weight here and there. So the frame is mostly TIG welded, but still features lugged dropouts on the fork and a lugged section at the rear dropout / brake mount area, which offers a really nice little touch, in my opinion. It adds some character, which is great. So it also comes with a 68mm threaded bottom bracket again, which is great. But the first thoughtful change here is the bike now comes with 10 by 142 rear spacing and 10 by 100mm front spacing. But better yet, Surly finally ditched that horizontal sliding dropout, which were absolutely miserable to adjust or simply to align the disc. Yeah. So the idea was nice. I mean, the simplicity of removing a wheel forward when you actually had fenders on your bike was kind of genius. But a friend once told me, yeah, things designed for multiple uses usually do most of them poorly. And that summed up Surly's opposing tension dropouts pretty perfectly. So many folks ended up using the monkey nuts to actually make them tolerable, but thankfully, Surly just did away with them, and good riddance. But it's not all straightforward here, folks. So the new Straggler uses what Surly is calling through axles. Technically, they're not really through axles with a QR dropout. It's basically a vertical dropout. But the hub, basically where the wheel axle kind of sits or goes, does sit inside the fork or the rear dropout. So it does mimic everything a through axle does without the actual through part. As yeah, I don't know, you get the point. But the upside here is that you'll never actually lose the axle, as they basically stay in place while you remove the wheel, which is nice. They still provide that precise, secure fit, which is what you want from a through axle, added stiffness as well. That said, I couldn't help but wonder what might happen if you forget to tighten the wheel fully down, or if one of the bolts comes loose mid-ride. The Straggler comes with a new fork and an updated 44mm head tube, which means that you can now run a wider variety of forks on the market, including gravel suspension forks if you want to run a 40mm gravel suspension fork, because it is corrected for suspensions. So this stock Straggler fork comes with a 410mm axle to crown measurement. So if you swap in a suspension fork with that added sag, you are still going to kind of alter the bike's ride characteristics by slackening the head tube angle and raising the bottom bracket up a little bit. But Surly did kind of think about all of this, as they did actually increase that bottom bracket drop, likely for the new kind of tire standards that we've seen and for overall stability, of course. And while I wanted to test the Cane Creek invert with this setup, I couldn't. So here's why. I realized soon after I was about to swap that this bike comes with flat mount brakes, but more specifically direct mount 160mm caliper. So basically that eliminates the need for an adapter, which is great and all, but this spec choice means that the stock caliper isn't compatible with many suspension or gravel suspension forks like the Cane Creek invert, the only one I have in my garage. That all said, this caliper will work on some other gravel suspension forks out there, but just something of note there. The fork does still have rack and fender mounts and comes in a 44mm offset. All right, so one of the most significant changes between the Straggler most people know and this new version is the sizing. So Surly simplified things, dropping from 11 sizes down to 8, and at the same time made the overall fit work better with, say, modern components in today's riding style. So the new Surly sizing scheme is designed so riders can more easily pick a frame based on their size, their bike size normally, from any brand, not the old Surly sizing, which is refreshing since Surly has always run really big. But now this also creates a few more issues for those who know what Surly size they actually are. But after hearing that, I ended up going with a 56 right here. And well, the fit feels really pretty dialed for me. If anything, I could likely reduce that 100mm stem to a 90 or an 80. But after a few hundred feet of riding every time I got on my bike, my body got used to the 100mm stem, and I was fine. So another update is, well, the sloping top tube you see here. It's not a horizontal, it slopes down a little bit for better standover. And that change also lowers the seat tube top tube junction. So paired with the addition of dropper post routing, which they have, this opens up a little bit more dropper post travel if, of course, that is the direction you want to take this bike. Of course, another big change here is the stack height. So Surly actually bumped up the stack height, which does two things here. So first, it reduces the need for the tower of spacers that were found on the past bikes, but it also puts riders in a more comfortable position right out of the gate. So for reference here, the old 54cm frame had a stack of 549mm, and the new 54cm frame has a stack of 570.7mm. So that's a pretty big jump, and while helps eliminate the 60mm stack spacers that came on the bike. So yeah, at the end of the day, Surly seems to be admitting here that the bike should feel more comfortable without having to juggle all of those spacers on the steer. This looks better, right? All right, so finally, just like the older Straggler, the small sizes will continue to be optimized around that 650B wheel size, with sizes 46cm to 52cm builds coming with 650B tires, and have clearance for 650B by 50mm on those sizes. All right, number 5, I think it is safe to say that gravel is, well, it is. It's the most popular style of bike in today's market. So working that term into their marketing makes a lot of sense, right? That all said, I'd argue that the Straggler was a bit ahead of its time, right? Plenty of folks used it for gravel biking back in the day or today. After all, it could clear 700 by 50mm tires on many sizes, but with modern mountain bike inspired geometry now kind of bleeding into gravel bikes, and for good reason, as it certainly makes more capable bike, would certainly kind of follow trend. That would kind of be unlike them, right? So while the new version is certainly more in line with some changes that we've seen in the gravel world, I wouldn't call it progressive. And I think that's exactly what Surly was going for. On the 56cm frame, you will find a 72-degree head tube angle, a 73-degree seat tube angle, 433mm chain stays, and a wheelbase right around 1033mm. So not much has really changed on the front end of the bike, but Tweaks like lengthening the rear end, lowering the bottom bracket, and some fit updates certainly do kind of make it ride a bit more confident than its predecessor. Still, with toe overlap issues and a general short overall length, I found myself kind of feeling hesitant at, say, higher speeds or when pushing it into terrain, certainly outside its comfort zone, like single track. B, wasp, not a bee, a wasp. We do not like wasps. I want to kill it. I hate wasps. All right, so where were we? There it is. Get out of here. Chipmunk party over here. Golly. The beauty of a bike like this is, well, that it gives me, I'd say, the psychological push to ride a little farther from home, right? You know those days when you kind of set out or plan on riding that same loop that you always ride, but once you actually get out there, you just want to keep going or take that left turn that you've never taken. That's what the Straggler does for me. It gives me back a bit of motivation that I thought I'd lost. So gravel bikes tend to actually do that for me. I get stuck in my routine and hop on a drop bar bike, and suddenly I'm eager to kind of crank out more miles. So the Straggler's overall stack actually allows some good comfort here for those all day or long rides. And the bike actually feels nicely balanced on smoother climbs and descents. In fact, even has a little bit of spunk when I lay down some quick bursts, like hammering up a hill. It also is kind of nimble enough to dodge an unwanted rock. But when the rough stuff is unavoidable, it's hard to kind of separate that feel of the front end to the back end. Compared to some other gravel bikes that I've tested recently. That means that you certainly get knocked around a little bit more. And when the terrain got a little steeper, or I'd say more demanding, I certainly found myself reaching for the brakes more often than I would like. But what does take the edge off is, well, big fat tires. Like I mentioned earlier, Surly has 50mm tire clearance long before most drop bar bikes did, at least for a steel kind of do-it-all rig. And honestly, there's no real reason for Surly to kind of keep pushing the limits here. Sure, maybe 55mm clearance would be nice here, but the current 50mm clearance works. And when I actually first got the Straggler, I tested it with the stock 41mm Surly Nards for a few rides before swapping on the 50s here, and it gave me certainly more confidence and softened the ride quality overall. I will admit, for a gravel bike, especially one without long or kind of slack geometry, that's probably the best upgrade that you can make, and definitely, I'd say, the cheapest way to get more comfort out of your bike. But here's the thing. You can't just throw on 50s on this particular bike and run your standard gravel tire pressures. You really need to unlock the benefits here. And well, to do that, you've got to run lower tire pressures. So I've been using the Wolf Tooth tire pressure calculator to actually fine tune pressures just to make sure I'm maximizing my performance. And it's worked out really well. So now I wouldn't say this trend is anything new. I've been preaching the benefits of wider tires on drop bar bikes for a very long time, but interestingly, the industry is only now kind of catching on. So I'm gonna have a full video on this coming up in the next few months, so stay tuned for that. So Surly describes the Straggler as a light-duty touring bike and all-weather commuter, but what does that really mean? Well, unlike the Grappler or the Bridge Club, you'll actually notice that it doesn't come with braze-ons in every possible spot on the bike. Some folks really appreciate a bike loaded with mounts like that, while others certainly don't care as much or only want them in a few key spots like on the fork or something like that. So that all said, the Straggler still handles gear surprisingly well when loaded down. So the ride quality is fine as is, not the most comfortable bike, but certainly not the least similar to what I found with the Bridge Club. But when you add some weight, the bike actually feels a little bit more grounded and forgiving, which is a welcome trait, obviously. And the best part is, even when loaded, the Straggler feels just as efficient and kind of motivated as when it is unloaded. I was able to actually explore new trails and get a fresh perspective right out of my backyard while having this thing loaded. Even if I ended up kind of rubbing my toe from time to time, was kind of annoying, it still was very motivating. So despite the sloping top tube, I was still able to fit my Rock Guys 56cm cutthroat HZ frame bag without issue. The bike does still come with a solid set of mounts. You've got front and rear rack mounts. You've got 3 bottom mounts on the frame And you have one location of triple pack mounts on the down tube here to let you run, say, a cargo cage if you prefer that. All right, so in recent years, you could either buy a Straggler as a complete build or a frame set, and that was basically it. But with this new version, you actually have a few more options. I guess just one more option. You've got a GRX build. You've got a 1x11 Qs build, which I'm testing here. And then obviously you also have frame set option available in their shaggy carpet and subtropic algae colorways. So the Qs drivetrain is a solid upgrade from that Apex spec on the previous Straggler, at least in my opinion. Shimano's Link Glide system is ridiculously durable and should last a very long time, which makes a really smart choice for a bike like this. Even better, it's an 11-speed 1x, which comes with an 1150 cassette paired with a 40-tooth chainring. So on some of the steepest pitches I rode, around 20%, I definitely felt that gearing, but otherwise, the range felt very adequate on both high and low ends. And the shifting was really mostly crisp, although I did notice a few inconsistencies. And the extra effort actually it requires to shift through gears could actually bother some that have wrist issues. So keep that in mind. The Q's levers are paired with hydraulic brakes, which worked fine overall, though one actually it feels like it needs a bleed. I'm guessing that was just an issue from trimming the lines to send to me to test. I doubt it was something inherent to the system, but I didn't actually bother fixing it since I didn't want to get the bleed kit out, but maybe it would have been easier if it was mechanical, because then that would be an easier fix. I don't have to get things out, maybe just a tool. Anyways, so the wheels and tires are where Surly certainly skimped out here. So the bike comes with stock 33 TPI wire bead nards, which are not tubeless ready, and Alex rims, which were not taped to be tubeless. So in order to swap to 50mm rubber, I had to tape the rims and install valves. Not the end of the world here, but in today's market, not shipping with a tubeless ready setup feels a little dated. So finally, I really could have used a dropper post on a few kind of instances or descents with this bike. That's one of the upgrades that you do get if you spend a little bit more on that GRX build, along with a tubeless setup and a drivetrain bump. All right, so I really enjoy testing bikes from all kinds of brands because it gives me that perspective, right? Each builder or manufacturer is a little different, and it always gets me thinking about what could be done with a bike. So in the case of the Straggler, it's hard not to imagine a slightly longer front center, slacker head tube angle, slightly steeper seat tube angle. So I feel like that combination would actually add a bit more confidence in rougher terrain and obviously help reduce the toe overlap that I experience. But then again, when you're designing a bike for multiple use cases, a true do-it-all bike, it's harder to kind of justify those kinds of changes. So another improvement I'd like to see is water bottle mounts, just mounts in general, just for the ability to carry maybe 2 extra water bottles on the fork. And personally, I think all bikes should come with top tube mounts just right here. Though I will admit they kind of look a little out of place on steel frames when they're not being used, especially with these really ugly bolts that Surly specs on their bikes. Anyway, finally, let's just stop with the tubeless ready talk and just ship all the bikes tubeless. Even if they come with tubes installed, just make sure that the wheels are taped and there are valves that you can install quickly. Between the wire bead and the lack of tape and the tubeless valves, that's just another expense for the consumer. Or depending on how you look at it, I guess an easy upgrade for your or upsell for your local bike shop. So if you are buying this bike from your LBS, make sure to ask them about upgrading to tubeless before you roll out the door. It's hard not to think about what Surly could have done with the Straggler, but it's also tough to imagine them kind of changing too much on a bike that's actually been a classic for nearly 11 years. So looking back, they did what they needed to do here, right? They solved that messy dropout dilemma. No more calling your local bike shop or scouring Reddit threads to figure out the magic trick to getting the old one set up. And they also improved the sizing too. And at the very least, it's now in line with what other brands are doing which is a welcome sight. And if it marks the start of a broader trend of sizing it surly, well, that's cool to see, even if a few surly diehards might grumble about it. But maybe the best thing about the Straggler here is that it's still a do-it-all bike, striking a nice balance between performance and transportation. It's that kind of bike that takes you up and back down hills on a dreamy bike packing trip, or just gets you to and from work outfitted with fenders during a cold, wet 35 Fahrenheit winter day in Minneapolis. I often actually think back to my time in the city and realize that I could have actually had a much better tool for the job, at least commuting, and the Straggler always comes to mind. So when it comes to value, the Straggler has held strong for years. A full build set around 1,700 USD, which is impressive given tariff increase since 2018. But the new Straggler GRX build now comes in at 2,499 USD, and the Q's build, which I actually feel like is the closest to that older spec, is now 1,999 USD. And you've got the frame set, 899 USD. So, the Straggler. What do y'all think? You like the updates? Some of them, not all of them? Let me know in the comment section below. As always, thank you all so much for watching. And if you like what you saw in this video and want to see more like it, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell. And if you want to help support everything we're doing on this YouTube channel at BIKEPACKING.com, you can do so by joining the Bikepacking Collective. So the Bikepacking Collective offers a lot of awesome perks, including the all-new base camp, industry discounts with over 50 brands, which is pretty impressive. You've got monthly giveaways and the twice yearly bikepacking journal. So to learn a little bit more about the collective, you can click on the card in the top right corner here, and also follow the link in the description below. As always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, pedal further.